We're currently looking at John's message of repentance and the reality of how that impacts onto lifestyle. This message that was attractive to the crowds but not the religious leaders, because it challenged their familiarity of how they did their rituals and their routines and how they'd done it for centuries. And suddenly there's somebody inviting people to have this encounter with God who's taken the initiative towards them and met them where they are. As we unpack some of this, we began to ask ourselves a challenge of how does that affect how we do church today? What does church look like if we consider the power and the impact of the message of John the Baptist? And I think there's something in here that John's message is also contrasting the reactions of the rich and the poor. Let's cut to the chase. The crowds were generally working class people, whereas the religious leaders were probably what we would call today the middle class. And so you've got something of a class distinction between the religious leaders and the crowds, where the crowds are hungry to know the reality and to have practical ways to respond to God. But the rituals of the middle class religious leaders have kept them separated. I read an article a few months back of somebody who'd become a Christian, and they got invited round to someone's house for a meal. Now, this person who'd become a Christian had grown up in a family that was a working class family, and they went to church but discovered it was very middle class, and they went round for this meal with somebody, and all the food was put into little bowls with little serving spoons where you'd help yourself. And this person felt so out of their comfort zone, because for them food was eaten sitting in front of the TV with a tray on the lap, and sitting round a table and having conversations was alien to them. Now, that might be something which you're familiar with or not familiar with. However, so often in church we talk about being seeker friendly, but the reality is so much of what we do is designed to reach people who are just like us, who fit into our social norms, into our social structure. And as a result, we feel that we're called to do ministries to the poor. And I think in there, we'll often talk about our ministries to the poor in the church, where as a church, we've got a feeding programme, or we've got this, or we've got that. And please hear me right, I'm not knocking that, but it's a risk if we allow an attitude to develop that because of, it's a bit like the sketch that you saw many years ago with John Cleese and Ronnie Barker, where, I look down on him and I look up at him. That famous sketch that they had of the class system. And I think sometimes in churches we can have this danger that our ministries are something we do to people because we think that we're in a better position than they are, so we can give them out of our excess. That's a good principle, but there's a risk to us there that we do things to people rather than with people. And in doing so, we create a sense of dependency. There's also sometimes a sense that we do it to assuage our own conscience. We do things to meet our own needs. And it's easier sometimes to do a ministry to people rather than invite people to come and share life with us. I remember a few years back as a pastor, there was somebody who'd come to my church who had years and years in addiction and had multiple prison sentences. And he had become a Christian. I had the joy of baptising him, and I invited him round for a meal. And when I talked to him afterwards, he shared to me how uncomfortable he'd felt. I invited him to come and to sit round the table with myself and my family for Sunday lunch, where we dish Sunday lunch up. And he told me afterwards that sitting round a table and eating with a family was something he'd almost never done in his entire life. And it was so alien to him, and it was so scary that he very nearly ran out of my house and ran away because of how scary he found it. And I think sometimes there's a challenge for us to think about the way that we do life. My normal may not be other people's normal, but how willing am I to change, to move, to meet people where they're at? That's what John the Baptist did. That's what Jesus did. The religious people stayed in the temple and invited people to come to them, whereas John the Baptist and Jesus went and met people where they're at and made it easy for people to respond. John's message has a challenge, And there's a theme within there about the church's response to people. And in there, it starts to ask us this question of what is our theology of the poor?